So as the military takes power in Chile, uh, in the context of the Southern Cone, which has been on the verge of military governments in several countries. Brazil had already been under military rule, a military regime ideologically very similar to Chile's. In fact, we know that Brazil was an important supporter, probably with real operational support of the coup itself. Uruguay had become a democracy, had fallen from democracy to authoritarian rule in 1973. Bolivia was already a dictatorship. They had had a left-wing dictatorship military government and then a right-wing military government. So the right-wing military government under General Banzer was in control. Paraguay had had a military government of the old-fashioned kind with General Stroessner since the 1950s. And Peru was actually under a military government as well, although it was a kind of a left-wing Nasserite, they call it a Nasserite, nationalist military, development-oriented military government. The whole region was under military control. The last domino to fall was Argentina in 1976. So these military, with Chile now as the most public piece of this configuration of military, ideological, anti-communist, anti-Marxist regimes, they began talking to each other. So in early 1974, there are meetings. There's a meeting in Buenos Aires of all of these countries. Actually, the Brazilians were not present because it was Carnival, and so they didn't send a representative. And this is the first they agree to a series of operational cooperation. They are allowed to go into each other's countries, send security personnel, into each other's countries to help track down the exiles from their country who are living in other countries. And this is all very informal in 1974. At the end of but people are arrested and people are killed as a result of this collaboration. In the end of 1975, in November, they meet in Santiago in a meeting convened by Pinochet. Pinochet gives the opening welcome to all of the representatives of the military of the 6 countries. And they agree to a formal alliance which will have a data bank of subversion of all of the leftists in all of the countries in a single database, joint operations to go after these people in whatever country they happen to be. And then phase 3 is that they agree in principle, actually this was a few months later, they agree to operate outside of Latin America to go after the human rights advocates who are very active in Europe and gathering a lot of support against the military in the European governments and the European population. This was also happening in the United States, where a solidarity movement was becoming very strong. And so part 3, phase 3 of Condor, this alliance is named Condor at that first meeting because Chile's national bird is the condor. And they agree on this formal alliance that has communications facilities, data banks, so telex machines to communicate in code, a data bank based in Santiago that will gather the information from all the 6 countries in a central place, and then they would begin to communicate in real time about the people that they discovered, and the people they would plan operations to detain them. And Operation Condor was targeted at the most important exiles who were living and doing political work in each of these countries. Most of them were in Argentina, because Argentina was the last country to lose its civilian government. The immense majority of exiles, political activists from Chile and Uruguay particularly, but also Bolivians and Paraguayans, and to a lesser extent Brazilians, but still some Brazilians too, had gathered in Argentina. There was actually a leftist alliance of the most leftist revolutionary parties, the ones who believed in armed struggle, called the Coordinadora Revolucionaria, the Junta Coordinadora Revolucionaria, the JCR. And they were headquartered in Buenos Aires. It had been created by the Chilean MIR, the Bolivian ELN, the group that had fought with Che Guevara, the Tupamaros in Uruguay, and the ERP in Argentina. So the most radical groups had formed an alliance to strike back against the military governments, and they were headquartered in Argentina. And so a major target of Operation Condor was the JCR. And they obliterated the JCR within, the military coup in Argentina occurs in March of 1976. So 4 months after the creation of Operation Condor, it goes into full steam in Argentina, and within 2 months the JCR is obliterated and they're fleeing the country. So Operation Condor is a very successful attempt to internationalize the terror that had been happening in the individual countries. And famous major political figures were killed by Operation Condor, the most important of which, of course, was an operation that occurred here in Washington, D.C. Orlando Letelier was the former foreign minister. He had been defense minister at the time of the coup. He had been ambassador to the United States, and he came here after spending a year in prison in an island in the south of Chile. He comes to Washington to set up his political base, and he's very effective. A measure of his effectiveness or of his access is that 3 months before he was killed, he had lunch with Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is somebody who is in touch with everybody, and he actually was in touch with Orlando Letelier. And the Chileans targeted him as, and they used Operation Condor as for part of the operation to send Chilean agents to the United States who teamed up with some anti-Castro Cubans. They built a bomb, they put it in his car, and on his way to work with two co-workers, a young couple, Ronnie Moffett and Michael Moffett, the bomb goes off and kills Orlando and killed the young woman who was sitting in the car with him. That was the most important, that was the highest profile of the Condor murders, but in Argentina, the former president of Bolivia, Juan Jose Torres, I say president, he was not a Democrat, he was a military guy who had taken over by force, but he was a left-winger, and he actually was in alliance with some of the left-wing groups back in Bolivia. He was killed shortly after the coup in Argentina. The two most important politicians from Uruguay, Selman Micheline and Gutierrez Ruiz, respectively leaders in the Senate and the House of Representatives in Uruguay, and certainly Micheline would have been a candidate for presidency had he survived. Both of them were killed um, in April 1976. Major leaders of the extreme leftist groups, the MIR, were killed in Argentina, and other people who were not like household names but Communist Party leaders from various countries, and then human rights leaders. I mean, the web of the net to capture and torture and kill anybody who was effective in opposition to the military governments is working full-time in 1976 and 1977. It really continued until 1980, 1981. The total number of victims, of course, is it's a very selective program. About 650 activists were caught up in Argentina and in the other countries. And unlike other waves of repression, in the case of Condor, so the essence of Condor is that you're detained in a country that is not your own by police or military who are not your own. You may be then turned over to them, transferred back to your country, but the one common deadly thing about this is that probably 90% of the people that were caught up in Condor were killed. This is studying things that is intentionally being kept secret. And when you're keeping something secret, you don't have a journal article about it. There's no way to find out what's going on unless you can interview people who are actually participating in this, or if you are able to work declassified documents, find archives of documents that were once secret that have come into the public domain. And then you can try to understand what was going on. But it was intentionally hidden not only from us, but from their own citizens. And so finding out what's really happening when the governments themselves are keeping it secret from you is an enormous task. It's not impossible. I'm here to say that I've been working this territory for many years, and you can do it. But it's really difficult, and you have to be very, very critical and very stubborn in going after the evidence.